As I mentioned, our format today is a discussion on a topic by a panel of individuals, followed by open Q&A. We will be discussing how to secure federal funds to support the healing of victims of crime. Following this webinar, the center will email you handouts as well as a full Q&A document with information shared today. Thank you for responding to the poll. As we talk today about healing for victims of crime, I would like to encourage you to take time for your own well-being and care using any cultural items to support you in this discussion about victims of crime. This topic requires meaningful attention by all who do this work, including those of you who are joining us today. Let's take a moment to center ourselves with a song by Dustin Newman of the Adok tribe of King Clove, who is the Youth Services Program Coordinator at APIA, who offered us a recorded opening song.
Ang nakakan Dustin Newman asaktakin nangam tnu ilan unyuk nakasaktakin agdagamilan akaktakin kayuk anchorjamilan tanakikokin awa cooking illusion perlaf and association. Hello everyone, my name is Dustin Newman. My unangak name is Unyuknach. I'm originally from Keene Cove and I work at the Illusion Perlaf and Association. And of course I live here in Anchorage. I want to thank each and every one of you for allowing me to come into this space and to share a song with you all. I want to acknowledge the land that I'm standing on, the caretakers of this land, I should say, the Inuit people where Anchorage sits today. So the song I'm going to be sharing with you guys, we call Tilila, and it is a song that is used to clear out the space of any negative energy. We usually have this song accompanied by a group of dancers who sweep out through the movements, they sweep out that negative energy. The song itself comes from our relatives in Russia, the Koryak people. For Unangak people, our dancing went to sleep for some time, and it wasn't until the 1980s that it was reawakened. Through the help of our Russian relatives, we were able to bring back our traditional dancing. And so this song, like I said, is called Tilila, and I hope it starts this meeting off in a good way for you all. Tilila, 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 tilila.
Thank you, Dustin, for sharing your cultural teachings with us today and starting us off in a good way. If you haven't already done so, please use the chat feature in the chat box and enter your name and introduce yourselves by your name and with the tribe or tribal organizations you're representing today. And now I am pleased to turn the time over to Catherine Dartschmidt, Director of the Tribal Division with the Office for Victims of Crime.
Jamie, thank you very much. And our thanks also to Dustin for starting off our meeting in a good way. We are so appreciative of that sharing. I want to thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. We are excited to offer this talking circle, which is sponsored by the U.S. Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime Human Trafficking Capacity Building Center. Talking circles bring panelists together with participants in a moderator-run question and answer session to share experiences about working in tribal communities. I am very grateful to OVC's partners at the Human Trafficking Capacity Building Center who created this event, to Jamie Bird, who is moderating the event for us, to my colleague Bonnie Robertson from the Office for Victims of Crime Tribal Division for lending her expertise to this effort. And we are also very fortunate to have experts on the panel today to talk about how they have seen Tribal Victim Service set-aside grant funds used effectively to support Native communities. Thank you, Tara and Rain, for being willing to share your perspectives with us today. A variety of topics will be explored in talking circles throughout the year, and we hope that you will join us again for other talking circle discussions. But now we'll turn to today's topic, which is the OVC Tribal Victim Services Set-Aside Grant Program, and a chance to talk about how that grant program supports tribal communities in developing and delivering services for crime victims. An important part of the Office for Victims of Crime's mission is to administer grant award programs that are funded under the Crime Victims Fund. This fund is not taxpayer money, but primarily includes criminal fees and fines paid by convicted federal offenders. Each year, Congress authorizes the Office for Victims of Crime to use a portion of the balance of the Crime Victims Fund to support grant programs for victim services. In 2018, Congress created for the first time a Tribal Victim Services set-aside under the Crime Victims Fund. And this tribal set-aside has been included in every federal budget since 2018. The vision for the set-aside program is to make sure that every federally recognized tribe that needs funds to support victim services has access to funds. In response to tribal consultations and listening sessions in which tribal leaders expressed to the Office for Victims of Crime a strong preference that the tribal set-aside funding not be competitively awarded, the Office for Victims of Crime administers this program through a formula. Applicants submit a population certification at the beginning of the year to signal their intent to participate in the program. For 2021, this population certification process is ongoing now. If your tribe intends to participate in the 2021 Tribal Victim Services Set-Aside Grant Program, you must submit a population certification to the Office for Victims of Crime by March 5th. My colleague Bonnie will speak more about this process later, and there will be some other resources posted for you to use to help you understand how that process works. All federally recognized tribes are eligible to apply for 2021 set-aside funding, regardless of whether you have participated in this program in the past, and regardless of whether you last received a set-aside award in the previous year, or if you still have project period or project funds remaining on that grant from a prior year. Since the Tribal Set-Aside Program began in 2018, OVC has made hundreds of Tribal Victim Service Set-Aside Awards, which now provide victim services to thousands of crime victims in hundreds of tribal communities across the United States. Tribal Victim Services Set-Aside grantees are using funds to provide services to domestic violence victims and sexual assault victims, to pay the salaries of victim advocates, to run supervised visitation programs to allow children to maintain contact with their families, to provide civil legal assistance to crime victims who are dealing with the repercussions of their victimization in the court system, to buy emergency groceries or pay for emergency housing or shelter for crime victims, to amend tribal codes, to include stronger victim protections, to lease vehicles, to take victims back and forth to appointments, and to hold things and ceremonies to help victims connect back to their communities. These tribally run programs are serving victims of arson, assault, burglary, child abuse, dating violence, domestic violence, elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, kidnapping, labor trafficking, sexual assault, robbery, sex trafficking, and stalking. And these are only a few examples of the many ways that tribes are currently using these funds. Today, our panelists will discuss how to develop new or enhance existing tribal victim service programs and how funding from the Office for Victims of Crime Tribal Victim Services Set-Aside Formula Program can support your efforts. A link for how to submit the population declaration to signal your tribe's intent to participate is going to be included in the chat in materials that are available from this talking circle. This talking circle conversation today will offer you ideas for how you can use the funding to support victims of crime in your tribal community. And now I would like to thank you for your time this afternoon and turn the meeting back over to our moderator, Jamie Bird.
Thank you, Catherine. Let's get started. Joining me today are three panelists, Bonnie, Tara, and Rain. Bonnie Roberts is a victim justice program specialist assigned to Tribal Division at OVC, where she manages victim assistance grants specific to American Indian Alaska Native communities. She has more than 23 years of experience working in the field of victim services, serving as a victim legal advocate and as a consultant on crime victims' rights compliance prior to her work at OVC. Welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
We also have Dr. Tara Ford, is the Interim Director of Community Health Services at the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association. She is an enrolled member of Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. Prior to working with APIA, Tara worked for the University of Alaska Fairbanks, where she explored strategies for wellness among youth in rural Alaska and learned how they navigate difficult situations. Quality social supports and cultures were found to be good medicine. When Tara transitioned to APIA more than 6 years ago, she sought after OVC federal funds and received OVC funding to serve the Unang'ah people. She has been partnering with OVC ever since to offer services for victims of crime. Welcome, Tara.
Hello, it's nice to be here today. I appreciate everybody's time for joining the circle.
And lastly, but not, we have Rain Galvin, who is the Wellness Project Coordinator at APIA and is Unang'ah and Athabascan. She has worked with at APIA in the Community Health Service Division since 2014 and transitioned in 2018 to her current role, where she supports Alaska communities with workable, culturally relevant solutions to community health issues. Welcome, Rain.
Thank you, Jamie, and thanks for everyone for joining us today.
To start our discussion, I'd like to ask the panelists a few questions. Following a few opening questions, we will shift to your questions. Please enter your questions at any time in the Q&A featured at the bottom of your screen. Rain, we are going to start with you. What are some basic services needed for a victim of crime?
It's a good question. So I think it's kind of narrowed down to three categories, which are the immediate needs, the supportive services, and the aftercare supports. As far as the immediate needs, you know, in our region, we have, you know, a culture, and so culturally sensitive, culturally sensitive providers was a big need, and that included primary care staff and behavioral health staff that needed cultural sensitive training. Also trauma-informed training for our police and VPSOs, so that way our victims aren't re-traumatized. As far as supportive services, safe homes in each community. Some of our communities are between, 15 people and for smaller ones, and then the other ones are over 1,000 people. And the only way in and out of these communities is by airplane. And so if something happens, people need to know where they can go in each of these communities. Also, women's shelters, and in a recent community needs assessment, men's shelters came up because men are also victims of crime. Advocates who are available to give referrals for employment, housing, legal, anything, to help our victims. As far as aftercare supports, dedicated staff came up, and that's, people need to know that they can, work with somebody and trust that the people that are there to help them are their heart is in it. Transportation, employment, housing, our region is so small and there's not very much housing in our region, especially if like somebody has to leave a situation, where do they go? So that was a big one. And employment, it's hard to figure out where to work in a small community. And lastly, traditional healing. So that way people can get recentered back to their roots, back to their culture. So pretty much it.
Thank you, Rain. Our next question is for Tara. What impacts has APIA seen as a result of OVC federal funding?
Thanks for the question, and thanks, Rain, for your categories of some of the needs. From those needs, APIA has been able to try and meet some of those needs with our funding. And I will highlight 3 of our areas that we've focused on throughout the years that we've been partnering with OVC. The first area is around strengthening critical partnerships. Rain had mentioned the need to have trained responders to victims. And so one of our first partnerships that we reached out to was with our village public safety officers. We were able to create a resource card with our funding that village public safety officers were able to hand out when they responded to certain situations. Because in the moment, digesting a whole bunch of information is really tricky. So if we were able to hand them something that they could have at a later time, it really helped link to later services. So that partnership with our village public safety officer program, and then we had regular meetings with the coordinator of that program, really was helpful in having a unified response to victim services in the region instead of having siloed services. So that was a really great partnership that we were able to do with the funds. In addition, when working with our OVC technical support or TA support, that has been a great resource throughout the years that we've worked with OVC. So I highly recommend really tapping into the TA support that's available through the awards. Rain also touched on targeted training. We really focused some of our funds to impact that area. We were able to train our behavioral health staff specifically on working with individuals who have experienced a violent crime. And in addition to targeted trainings for behavioral health, folks working in the with victims of crime were able to attend conferences, specifically the National Indian Nations Conference, the Justice for Victims of Crime. This conference, it was foundational to the work that we do in regards to networking. It increased skills of our staff, And then it generated ideas for what we could bring back to Alaska to modify and implement in the region. In addition, we are able to have a systematic impact focused on our training, to have all of our health department complete a training for trauma-informed care. And then any new staff that join our department, they have to complete this trauma-informed training. And so that was created out of our OVC work that has had lasting impacts into the future because it's embedded into our onboarding now. And finally, the third thing that I want to pull out for some impacts that we've seen is it's the direct impact on providing meaningful services. With our OVC funds, we have been able to create a safe and inclusive space for victims to be heard, supported, and gain confidence and strength. Through our work, as Rain mentioned, we were able to do some community needs assessments. And early, one of our first community needs assessments we've completed, we learned that victims want to know that it wasn't their fault. So that was at the core of the services for the remainder of our funding work that we've been doing. And it led to us hosting healing through the arts and culture events in 4 different of our island communities. The artists that were facilitating the events were accepting and instilled hope. So hopefully some of these ideas, the 3 ideas that I shared out, will inspire some ideas that you might be interested in doing with your funds, and I highly recommend applying. I'd like to share the following photographs. They illustrate some of our Healing Through the Arts and Cultures events that we hosted with our funding. And the responses from attendees of these events were so powerful. They really resonated with the space of healing and feeling accepted as they walk through their recovery and healing journey. So we had the Healing Through the Arts and some cultural events throughout our OVC funding. So thank you.
Thank you, Tara, for sharing these ideas and the impacts you're having in Alaska and sharing the photos too. I think that really touches us as we're working within our own communities and the participants are working within their own communities. As a reminder to our participants, please submit your questions for the panelists in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer it during today's talking circle. Bonnie, this portion of the question is for you. Would you please explain the TVSSA formula program and process to access the funds?
Sure. The Office for Victims of Crime Tribal Victim Services Set-Aside Formula Grant Program, is also known as the TVSSA, provides support to tribal communities to enhance services for victims of crime through activities that address the unique needs of crime victims in tribal communities. Tara and Rain just shared some of the ways that APIA has used OVC funding to support victims of crime in the communities that they serve. And just to let you know, the TVSSA funds can be used to support similar activities that meet the needs of crime victims that are unique to your communities and your culture. If you're wondering just what can be funded under the TVSSA, the upcoming fiscal year 2021 TVSSA solicitation is going to include an expansive list of allowable and unallowable costs and activities, and there's some good news that list has been revised this year to be a whole lot more user-friendly. So hopefully you will be able to find the answers to any of the questions you might have about that. For those of you who are not familiar With the TVSSA, it, as Catherine explained at the beginning, it's a non-competitive grant program, which makes it different from other grant programs and is open only to federally recognized tribal governments, either applying individually or as consortia. And also it's open to Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act regional corporations and their designees. So for those of you who applied last year, things are going to be similar to how we did things last year. The application process will be completed in 2 phases, with phase 1 consisting of the submission of the population certification form. These population certifications will be used to determine the formula award amounts for each applicant. Those applicants will then be invited to submit a full application under phase 2 of in a subsequent solicitation that's be upcoming in 2021. So as Catherine indicated, phase 1 is now underway, and OVC is currently seeking population certifications from eligible applicants to signal their intent to participate in the non-competitive fiscal year 2021 TVSSA. If you intend to participate, you must submit a population certification by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, March 2021. If you're a designee or a consortia, you must also submit official documentation of your authority to apply for the grant on behalf of each member tribe listed on the population certification form. This could be a tribal resolution, consortium bylaws, etc. It must be an official document, and submit that along with your population certification form. Good news for those of you who applied in fiscal year 2020, you can reuse the population certification form that you submitted with your application if the data is still accurate. Population certification form and other important information, including how to submit the form, can be accessed on the OVC website, and the address is going to be added into the chat box. If you have any questions about the population certification under phase 1, please contact OVC at the following email address: ovctribalsetaside, all one word, at ojp.usdoj.gov. And that email is also being provided in the chat box. And just a final reminder, that population certification form and any other required documents must be submitted to OVC by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, March 5th, 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie, for the information about the application process. Our next question is to Rain. In your work as a wellness coordinator, how have you seen culture heal victims of crime, and what are some of the positive impacts of this approach?
Thanks, that's a great question. I was just gonna highlight that we've supported a few different cultural events through our grants, and I think the biggest takeaway is that, you know, people, our people, they want to be centered back to their roots, and, you know, not only that, but then this also gives them like healthy activities to do to start the healing process, I feel like, with being a victim of crime. So it's a good way, it's a good healthy outlet, you know, learning new things, teaching things to your children, teaching things to your family members. So yeah.
Thank you, Rain. This next question is for you, Tara. What would you recommend to professional advocates who face a situation due to high biases and a lack of familiarity with the issues, cannot believe a true victim? Have you encountered such a situation, and how did you handle it?
I think I've learned a lot when sitting and visiting with victims, how much they feel as if they have not been believed. And so, yes, it is something that happens where victims aren't believed. And I think nurturing that relationship with the victim and getting them to the right resources that will have a supportive ear to their situation. As Rain mentioned at the beginning, we do work in really small communities, and it's really hard for victims to share out what they've experienced, and then it will have ripple effects in the community. So trying to support victims to be able to link into the services is a hard thing. So it's a great question. I appreciate the question being asked. I think it's taken time to have that language and awareness around victimization happening in the communities and linking to resources. And so it's tricky. And I don't know that I have a golden answer, except time and patience and really getting the victim into an ear that will hear and believe them. And that is really the best we can do for the victim in that moment, in the time when they're sharing and being vulnerable with what happened in their past. And so, yeah, that's my response right now. And if anybody figures out the best way to have people embrace victims, I think I'm all ears too. So I think it's still a learning journey is the sum of that.
Can I say something too? Sorry. I just think, this also circles back around to the dedicated staff portion, because people need to know, victims need to know that we're here, that we are willing to help them navigate legal processes. It's all kind of a tricky thing that people have to deal with when it comes to being victimized, and advocates, it's about trust, and they need to know that they can trust us, and that we're going to try to do everything we can to get them through the process from beginning all the way to the healing at the end, hopefully.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you, Rain. This next question we have is, this is for Tara, what advice would you give to a tribe or an organization thinking about applying for federal funding for the first time?
My first advice is to apply. Definitely apply. If you're wondering, if you're applying for the very, very first time, my advice is to know the deadlines, get your stuff in within the deadlines. There's webinars and supports out there. Tap into those, look at the websites, print anything, highlight certain things, circle deadlines and star them really big. But the one thing I would take home is to apply. I really appreciated the question at the beginning because and Rain's response about the trust. We have to have that trust established, and if we can build supports and programming to foster trust, I say tribes need to move forward and apply.
Okay, I just wanted to jump in again, as far as applying, I think it was helpful for me to take a grant writing course. Just a basic one is super helpful, but also don't get discouraged. We have applied for one grant twice. This will be our third time, but I'm still excited for it. I'm still hopeful for it. And, make sure that all of the boxes are checked, from, on the application checklist. Make sure that everything is in there. You're not forgetting anything for sure.
Rain, that's a great comment about not getting discouraged, and so separate funding, but to support advocates, we have applied twice and didn't receive the award. Look at the feedback. So this is a different structure that this one is, but definitely apply and look at feedback if you're not awarded, but that's separate from this. Thanks, Rain.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you, Rain. Bonnie, I want to revisit, as we're talking about some of the application process, one of the questions is, if you currently have 2019 TVSSA funding, can we still submit a population certification?
Yeah, yes, you can. You can submit it, and then when it comes time to submit your application materials, when the solicitation is released, you can apply for non-duplicative activities. So if you want to build upon a program, many people have done that. So there's lots of grantees out there who received a 2018 award, and then they build upon it on 2019, and then expanded even more on 2021. As long as there's no duplication, you can apply. Yes, it's open to everyone.
Thank you, Bonnie. So as I'm going through, just a reminder, if you have questions for any of our panelists, please use the chat feature so that we can ask some of your questions. Our next question is open to either Tara, Rain, or Bonnie. Or I guess I would say this one would go to either Tara or Rain. As a grant manager, what are other ways you've seen tribes use OVC funding to reach victims of crime?
So in our organization, we have multiple departments, and we're not the only ones. Tara and I are not the only ones in our company that have a Department of Justice grants. And so in other departments, we use our grant money to fund our public safety, our there's advocates downstairs, there's all kinds of ways. And I was trying to talk to our coworker down there, and I was like, hey, I have this great idea. If we don't get funded for it, take it and run with it, So, it's nice that we all work together and we bounce ideas off of each other. It's that way we make sure that like the end result, the money is going where it needs to go, and that's to help the victims of crime. I know that our coworker has worked with like our cultural heritage director to work with culture camp, and just having these conversations. So.
Thank you, Rain. This next question is for Bonnie. What will be required to apply for TVSSA funds after population certification? Is there a long application to complete?
Okay, so as I stated, once your population certification forms are received, then that information will be used to generate the formula award that will be provided to you to apply. When the solicitation opens, there will be a process just like any other solicitation application where you have to provide some different things. And if you go to the OVC website and click on the information regarding the FY21 solicitation, you'll be seeing some different options on how the applications will be submitted this year. It may not be on there yet, but it should be on there soon. But there is a process just like any other application process, but that will be further down the line. Right now, the only thing we need from you is a population certification. And if you're a consortia or designee, nonprofit designee, or any type of designee, that official authorization to apply from the member tribes.
Thank you. This next question is for Tara. What type of support can OVC offer to help our staff get trained in providing services to victims of crime? And should I include money in the budget to send staff to training or participate in virtual conferences?
Yes. So through OVC, we have been assigned technical assistant support. And so we work with our TA support pretty regularly, and especially on certain things, tasks that we're trying to get done for the award. Our community needs assessment, they've helped framing questions and getting that ready to go out. We've had a strategic plan and a logic model. They give support with that. So those are things that the TA support can provide. And then there's other specific trainings if we're noticing certain staff are needing extra support in working with victims. We can reach out to our TA, request something very specific that we're needing support on, and then they can see if they have that already in their pocket to be able to provide us direct training, or then they can put in a ticket and work with OVC to try and get that training for us. So the TA support is available. That's what we've had. And then working with your program manager, like Bonnie, and if we have certain trainings or anything that we're interested in, we can write that right into our grant award and just line item that out and identify certain areas you might know as you're building. If this is the first time you're applying for the grant, and you know there's certain trainings that are needed to help your staff be ready to implement the work, write that in. That's what we've done. We've written that right into the grant from the get-go. And if we notice throughout the year that we are lacking something, we again work with our project manager and try and get that training, or our TA. So training is super important and has been foundational in our award. So I highly recommend thinking about that, because in the end, it ultimately helps support the victims. So it's a good idea to have that in your awards. Or we found it impactful.
Thank you, Tara. As a reminder, if you have a question for any of our panelists, please use the Q&A featured at the bottom to enter your question. Our next question is, what types of crime victims can be supported with OVC funds? For example, if we already have a domestic violence program, could we use funds to provide services to victims of robbery or assault or families of missing or murdered persons? Bonnie?
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. Yes, you can use the funds to survive to support any types of victims of crime. You can do a comprehensive program that supports all victims of crime, or if there's a particular need in your community that's not being met, you can use these funds to fill those gaps and provide services to any type of victim.
Thanks, Bonnie. And in fact, I've learned a lot working under this award, because we had this scope of working with victims of crime, but then as we've worked throughout the years, that scope is broadened just because we are able to provide a wide scope of victims of crime. And so it's really inclusive, and I've appreciated that and have learned throughout the years different areas that we need to be responding to. So it's been helpful.
Thank you, Bonnie and Tara. This next question for Bonnie: can a tribal designee serve more than one tribe? Also, with the population counts, will that reduce funding amounts for smaller tribes? If so, do you recommend those smaller tribes with smaller populations apply each year to ensure they can cover their annual operating costs? Hasn't the grant application changed now that it is non-competitive?
Okay, regarding whether a designee can apply on behalf of a number of tribes, we'll have to get back to you on that. And we really do encourage smaller tribes to apply. because you can utilize these funds right now, especially if you don't have a victim services program, to do a community needs assessment and strategic plan in order to determine what the needs of your community are, and then use that information to develop a program and an implementation plan to move forward. So even if you're a small community who has not accessed these funds before, we strongly encourage you to apply this year.
Thank you, Bonnie. We also have a follow-up question regarding some of the funds. Can these funds be used for prevention activities?
No, they cannot. No prevention, no investigation, and no prosecution.
Thank you, Bonnie. We also have another follow-up question. Can you talk a bit about allowable expenses when it comes to renovations to existing buildings? Our nation recently bought a church for us, which is great and has a space we need, but we need to have floors evened out and walls built to provide offices.
Okay, that information will be helpful when we move into the next phase 2, the application phase. And once that happens, you can see and access the list of allowable and unallowable costs that will be allowed under the fiscal year 21 TVSSA. So I would say keep that thought. And once we move into the solicitation, then there'll be more information available to you about that.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you to the panelists here today. I want to just remind people, it sounds like with our panelists, the TVSSA is a great opportunity for you to really look into OVC. Please submit your population certifications by its deadline. We are going to wrap our talking circle today. I will leave the last remarks to Tara and Rain if you have anything to add before we close.
This is Tara. Thanks so much, everybody, for being present and your interest in applying for funds to support victims of crime. It's important work, and submitting your population certification is the first step. And please do that and have the important work go forward. I know throughout the country right now, just with the winter storm and everything that's going on, I value everybody's time for coming here. Some of the things that Rain and I have been able to navigate and host in our region may not be perfect fits in your communities, but there is such openness and flexibility working with your TA and the program officer to have programs that really matter to the communities that you serve. So I encourage everybody to apply. We've seen a difference, and I'm really grateful for Bonnie and the Department of Justice and OVC for all of their support and really focused attention to tribal communities. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Tara. Before we take it over to Rain and the rest of the participants, Bonnie, we had one question filter in that asked, what if after we submit our population certification, we are invited to apply for more funding than we need? Can we discuss the award amount with OVC before we submit our application? Bonnie?
Yes, you can. There were some people last year that the formula was calculated out to a certain amount, and they did not want to access that full amount of funds and applied in their application for less. But when the time comes, that's a discussion that you can have with us at OVC.
Thank you to all our panelists and to you for all your questions and participation today. Thank you for being here, for your time and participating in this discussion, and for the important work you are doing. All questions will be answered and distributed to everyone by email. Attached will be a Q&A document along with a link to the recording of this session and some additional handouts. I will turn it over to the panelists for them to say if they have any other items they would like to add before we close our session today.
I just wanted to echo what Tara was saying, having that relationship with your grant manager and then your TA providers are super helpful. And it's not just for like your specific grant. I mean, it's also like, it's also nice to hear what other grantees are doing with their funding, and that might spark some ideas in your head, like, oh, that would fit in great for our whole community, our whole region. And I've attending meetings, it's been helpful for me, and I've been like, hey Tara, they're doing this up north, or and she'd be like, all right, great, let's try to figure how we can do that out for our region. So it's great when it comes to the grant writing process for future grants, or maybe like an activity for the following month for your communities or something like that. So it's just have a conversation with your TA providers and your grant managers. They're people too, and they're very helpful, and they want to see you succeed.
Thank you, Bonnie, or thank you, Tara, Bonnie, and Rain. Bonnie, did you have something else to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to folks that I hoped you were inspired today by some of the things that you heard and some of the things that APIA is doing. And think about what you can do in your communities to create a safe and non-threatening environment for victims. There's a lot of things that you can do under the TVSSA. So really start thinking now about what potentially you can apply for when the solicitation opens.
Again, thank you, Bonnie, Tara, and Rain for your remarks. As mentioned, we'll be following up with each of you through email, attaching relevant resources, a document summarizing the questions and answers from today, and information about the next talking circle. If you're representing a tribe or a victim service provider, I encourage you to contact the center to request assistance with applying for the TVSSA funding, as well as assistance starting, sustaining, and growing your anti-trafficking work. The center's free services are intended to provide immediate and sustainable benefits to tribal nations with minimal demands on their time. Before we close, please take a moment to respond to our closing poll on your screen. Thank you. Now I'm going to turn it over to End Us in a Good Way. Dustin Newman of the of King Glove Tribe and Youth Service Program Coordinator at APIA offered us a recorded closing prayer to end our session in a good way.
It's been an honor on behalf of myself, Dr. Ford, Rain, and the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association to be included in today's conversations. There's a lot of important work to be done within our communities, as we saw within the talking circles today. And although we physically can't be together due to COVID-19, we still find a way as Indigenous people to come together. We still find a way to come together to laugh, to cry, and to heal. I want to leave you with the values that were taught to me by my elders, and values that are strong within our Unangak culture as a way for you to remember why you are doing what you are doing. In our Unangak culture, we say, Kurligen makachtakan chitchen ahukangen, the way of our beginning, our ancestors. We also say, Ichtakangen lulalich matalich anraringen matakun, believe in them and keep them going through time. And lastly, aniktu nerin akagen agnangen kulingen akohu malakakoch, for the coming generations that we do not see yet for their time here. May these values be our prayer to Arohoch, and to the four directions we say Nung akasachchen, Nung akasakchin, nung akasakchin, nung akasakchin. Bring it to me, bring it to me, bring it to me, bring it to me. Karasakung.